Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at life and at work. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. Today, our topic is life after law enforcement. In today's current environment, many deputies and officers have considered a new career path. It's best to leave law enforcement on your own terms, whether or not you are ready to retire. I'm here with Dustin Schutt and Dr. Alex Kondos. Dustin is a former law enforcement officer with a decade of experience in patrol and canine. He's an entrepreneur currently serving his community as a contractor. Alex is a 22-year veteran of law enforcement with a focus on SWAT and training in the Denver metro area. So we're going to talk a little bit about life after law enforcement, if there really is such a thing. Some of us kind of have questions about that. I think that actually all of us really have questions about that, and to really kind of start thinking about what does life look like after law enforcement. I've been in it now for 35 years, and Alex is you're probably coming up close.
I'm coming up on 22.
Yeah. And so I can tell you that from my perspective, I think about it a lot more. Maybe Alex, maybe not as much, maybe even more.
I think about it a lot.
But there's a lot of folks that I talk to, and there's a lot of folks I know would get out of law enforcement if they knew kind of what to do and how to handle all of that. One of the things that, and one of the reasons why I really was excited about doing this one, Dustin, is just watching the way that you have navigated that, because to me, that's kind of the way that you really want to do that, or that's the way that I would want to do that, and really that sense of entrepreneurship. But there's also some things that I know I would definitely miss in law enforcement, and through conversations that we've had, things that you definitely miss. But what does that look like, and how did you walk through that process?
Yeah, so I took a different path than a lot of people conventionally when it comes to their career. I early on, one of my first days on the job, when we're qualifying to carry our bullets to and from the jail, I was presented with the question of, what do you want to do through your career? What goals do you have in your career? And I'm in the back of our training class. We're all new, we're nervous, we're young. And I'm thinking about this question before it becomes my turn. And I'm hearing people say they want to be sergeants or the sheriff or all these high aspirations. And I'm like, wow, I'm not prepared for this. What do I want to do? And it came my turn. And I said, I want to be happy in my career, whatever that looks like. And I was chastised by the sergeant. No goals, no sense of where I wanted to be throughout my career. And that resonated with me early on. And I kind of wore that as a badge of honor of, no, I'm in control of my career. And if I don't have happiness, then I am not living my life. And ultimately that's what we're here to do. And still be the best law enforcement officer, partner, brother or sister, brother in blue. And my career was short. I had 10 years in law enforcement. I feel like I did a lot of things I wanted to do. And in 10 years, I just fulfilled my path. That happiness was fading away. I couldn't put a finger on it, and I started exploring what would truly make me happy. And it wasn't the job that I was having an issue with. I love the job. I love the people. I loved serving the community. Something wasn't fulfilling me anymore. And I had to take a deep dive in myself, say, what does this look like? Because I can't walk away from the people, our brothers and sisters, but I am not getting farther in life being happy. And I decided I'm going to dig down and figure out what I want to do with that. So in 10 years, I did kind of what you'd say a short career compared to a lot of folks, but I also found that you can have life outside of law enforcement. You're never going to truly be away. It's going to be a part of you forever. But you can still find that happiness without being disgruntled, and knowing when to look internally is the key to know when it's time to walk away on your terms. We know so many people who know almost to the hour when they're eligible to retire. And their whole identity is law enforcement, which is great. But there isn't a plan after that. The plan is to get to retirement. There's a lot of life after that. What does that look like? What does that look like to you? What does that look like to your family? Because family is an important part. And I think when you have spent your whole career charting a path of what you want to accomplish, there's a lot of energy and time that goes into that, but there isn't a lot of time and energy that goes into what am I going to do when I'm no longer in law enforcement. And I think that's where folks really need to sit back, do some self-reflection, and identify when you're not happy anymore, what's the next step? Because there's options outside of law enforcement. If you're not happy, you're not doing anybody any good, the community, if you're hanging on for a retirement. And it could be dangerous. You could lose everything if you're not prepared. So I was going through that. I said, what other skills do I have? I didn't have a ton. I was in construction before I was a cop. Got into law enforcement and did that for 10 years. And so construction's what I know. Does it make me happy? Yeah, I still get to help people. I still get to change things. My personality, it worked. So I visited with my family, got some encouragement, and made the decision to start phasing out of law enforcement mentally. That came with its own roadblocks because it's a secure paycheck. It's a great career. And how do I walk away from the brotherhood that comes along with that? And balance that with, well, the alternative is being not happy, working maybe disgruntled, and that's not a good alternative either. So throughout the process, over the course of about 18 months, I started navigating that until I made the decision that, you know what, there is life after law enforcement. And they can still work together and maintain those relationships and balance it. And I've been very fortunate to be able to balance both and still continue in the civilian world, which is, after 7 years, doesn't feel like I'm a civilian, right. And that's where it doesn't truly go away.
Yeah, and it's always been interesting to me, for knowing you for as long as I have, that you still have really good relationships with many of us that are still in law enforcement, and you're always extremely supportive of law enforcement, which I think you had brought up the point of getting out before you became disgruntled. And I think that's so important, because so many times folks don't get out before they become disgruntled, and we see them walking around the office all the time, and they're there only because they need that secure paycheck. They don't know how to navigate without it, or they're there because for no other reason than to get the medical benefit because they don't know how to navigate life without that. And then the other thing that you brought up that was real interesting to me, and Kathy and I recently had an opportunity just to take a couple of days off around her birthday. And we're driving down the road, headed up to the mountains to spend some time up there. And, I asked her, I said, when is retirement for you? When can I, have that not, that you're going to be completely done,
Right.
but, when it's not 40 hours a week, when it's, and then what does a day in the life of Mike or Kathy or us, what does that look like when we retire? What is it that we want to do? What does a day look like? What does a month look like? What are we going to do throughout the year? And it was interesting because it was hard sometimes to actually come up with that answer, because we haven't necessarily put a lot of thought into that. I think that we get into the job and we get into life and raising kids and now the joy of being around grandkids but it's what does a life look like after law enforcement, after we retire, after I'm not punching that clock and working 40, 50 hours a week in a law enforcement role. And the other thing that you brought up was the identity, our identity being wrapped up into our job and our role. That's it, I would say that sometimes that can be a problem if that is who you are, because when you walk away from that or when you're no longer doing that, if that's who you truly are, is you're a cop, and nothing else, that's going to be very, very difficult.
I think the mention of that is probably what's one of the scarier things. I mean, when I think about it, I mean, I'm definitely not at a point where I'm disgruntled and I have a long way to go, I think still. But, I mean, my whole adult life has been doing this job. I guess I have that extra side thing where I met my wife in this job. My wife is also a cop. It's not just me who has this identity and everything wrapped around it. And what do I do after this? It's both of us that have this. This is what this has been both of our whole adult lives, dealing with this. And we have kids, and there's definitely hobbies and things you do. But at the end of the day,
Right.
everything we do is based around this job. Our habits. I mean, loading up to go on vacation, we got to load up her off-duty gun and my off-duty gun and everything to go with it. This is just built into our lives with how we do everything. And you say that, and that's what scares me. I mean, yeah, there's the financial stuff, and you always got to wonder what you're going to do after that. But not necessarily that my whole identity is this, but no matter what, it's a big part of your life.
Right.
It definitely becomes on how you act and how you look at things and how you perceive the world. What is that for you when that one happened?
That's a great point, and that's what makes the law enforcement community so special. Coast to coast, worldwide. You travel the world and you talk to other cops, and instantly you mesh, and there's pride with that identity. But with anything good, there could be a counter perspective that it's consuming. You don't have healthy conversations that aren't law enforcement related, or relationships outside of law enforcement that are so important. And maintaining that balance, like with anything in life, is so important, because we need law enforcement community to get through some of the stuff we see. I mean, for me, one of the hardest things I navigated a year or so after leaving law enforcement was I wasn't responding to calls and compounding the things that we see and we take for granted. It almost normal that most people don't have to experience or go through their life. And when you stop, for me, when I stopped adding to those events, then they start to resurface. Mm. And if you're not mentally prepared for that, then you go down the bottle. And so many of those statistical nightmares we see with people within a few years of leaving law enforcement, they pass away, or, they're down a bad path. So maintaining those law enforcement relationships where I could still have a place where I can talk about these things and be understood, the banter that goes along with it, and that's so important.
No matter where you go, you get a bunch of cops together, and what do you talk about?
Right.
Well, not even cop work. It's everything. It's the other side of it too. I mean, most of the time, we're not talking about just the calls or the things we see. It's all the drama at work and all the politics and this thing we're at angry at this. And when you take that away, I mean, even like I said, for me, that's what we talk about at the house. And then when we don't have that to talk about, we stare at each other.
Right. And that's it's a mixed bag, because your spouse relates to what you're going through, and she's going through it as well. And that also could be toxic, because then it could potentially come into the one-up game of, well, that wasn't that bad. This is what I had to do, or this is what I'm seeing, or my supervisor's doing this. And it has to be tough in an agency where you work together, because you know the same people. But to have those those conversations and those hobbies outside of law enforcement, that plan to separate but still have communication, is what's worked for me. I've been able to dip into that when I need to and get some of that emotional support, some of that banter, that brotherhood that never goes away. But also have things outside of it to where I can separate both professionally and, physically from the job and move forward. And I think everybody's different, but to be successful for me in my ventures, I had to 100% step away from law enforcement. It wasn't dipping my toe out and being a reserve and having that, because I knew that if I didn't make the separation, then I would never be able to stop, which wasn't an option for me. My happiness, my life was more important. And I say that from a standpoint of my happiness, my family life. So the plan was the biggest thing, and then getting support from family. It's tough, because when you have these relationships in law enforcement, there's also a lot of negative feedback. People say, well, you'll be back. Everybody comes back. You leave, especially early in your career.
I think I told you you'd be back.
Yeah. But you were right. I never truly left, in the sense of the family, which was important to me, is important to me. But I had to separate and draw the line when it came to those relationships for a little bit, just to make sure I could be successful in my other ventures. So I think having a plan and then the family support's huge, because that changes your whole dynamic at home. You go from shift work and missing holidays and birthdays to being available. And when you've been married for a while, have children, they're affected by that as well and brought into that. So having the support for that change, and knowing that not only are you going to be going through professional withdrawals, from your experiences, but your family dynamic's going to change as well, and it's could be a shock to the system if you're not prepared for that.
So what if there was a main thing that you would want somebody to remember from this podcast? What would it be?
I think the main thing is knowing what you're trying to accomplish inside, digging deep, thinking about, are you truly happy? Is it the job or is it the situation that's making you unhappy? Through the course of 30 plus years, there's probably been multiple times where you were not happy in a situation or a position. But there's a bigger picture. So not being emotional at the situation, but digging in deep inside and saying, okay, this is no longer for me. And then making a plan, because if you have a plan, you can execute that plan and follow it, and being prepared to say, I can step away from this and I'll be okay. I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to retire, get in the bottle, and have no internal purpose anymore other than that my identity is gone with the badge. And 2 years later, you're not living.
I think you hit that pretty good. I mean, I know, once again, being not there yet, but thinking a lot about it, that the plan. I mean, there's a plan I have in my head, and I would know what, I think I would be terrified if I didn't have something. Whether I do it or not. I mean, I might just retire and decide to sit around the couch and catch up on SpongeBob, but at the same time, having something in the back of my mind where there's something after this, and if I want to do it, it's not stepping into an empty void or stepping into the unknown. There's something there, and you just did it earlier. You found something you wanted to do,
and I that's a big point I want to emphasize is we have so many days to walk this earth, and we have to provide for our needs, our families. But I think it gets lost that happiness and well-being kind of gets put to the back burner. And I think if you refocus that and, front sight focus on the internal part of why you're doing the job, how it's affecting your life in professionally and outside the work, and is that productive? Is that providing the life you want? And if it's not, then it's perfectly okay to move on and embrace your life, your path. And I feel that if you do that and maintain the relationships, for me, I still needed a sense of purpose outside of law enforcement. That community purpose. I was able to find that in still being there for my brothers and sisters through good times and bad, and making the effort to be available. Saying, I'm not going away. You're not getting rid of me. You might think you're getting rid of me. I might not be wearing the belt anymore, but I'm still in the fight with you. And that was my sense of purpose. That's how I was able to transition out and do things. I have a career outside of law enforcement, and I'm happy. I don't second guess the decision at all. But my heart is still in the job, and that never goes away. And I think knowing that it's okay to retire or switch professions, but you're still part of the family. And when you know that, then it's not as scary.
One of the keys is that sense of purpose. I think that most people that are in law enforcement, if they're truly doing it for the right reasons, it's because it's a calling,
Right.
right? And if it's a calling, that's a purpose. And when you step out of that, and that's no longer, I guess, your purpose, you've got to have something. And I think that goes back to, that's why you've got to plan this out, because there can be all kinds of different purposes for why we do the things that we do, or the things that really drive us. I would say, for me, it's a sense of service. I went into the Navy. I was in the Navy. I got out, and I immediately wanted to go back in.
Right.
I wanted to go back in because I no longer was having. I'd gone back. I was working construction before. I went back and worked in construction. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because I really enjoy doing that. To me, that's almost even like a stress release. But there was no sense of service, and really no sense of teamwork. And unlike what you're experiencing, those folks that I served in the Navy with, some of them were still in, but I was stationed in another state, in another city. So it wasn't like I could, that evening go over and, have dinner with them on a Friday night or something.
Right.
That was completely gone. And that sense of service was gone. And I immediately realized that. And that was a very, very tough time for me. Just kind of trying to figure out, what is it that I want to do, and how is it that I can now serve and fulfill that purpose, or that calling in my life. So had I been smarter, I would have been able to realize that at that young age, and had something set before I even got out of the military. But I think that you bring up such a great point in have that plan, but understand that part of that plan has got to be, what is my purpose? What is my sense? What is it that fulfills me, and kind of makes me tick, and make sure that's provided for, so that you don't go into a spiral.
Right.
And we kind of all know the consequences of that, and we've seen it. It's heavy in law enforcement. There's depression and suicide and divorce, and people getting turned into the bottle, or to drugs, or it's very, very unfortunate. People that have had great careers, you just watch them crumble, and it goes back to not having that plan,
Right.
not being prepared for taking that step.
Right. That self-assessment is very important. And, the statistics they're not in our favor in law enforcement post-retirement. And you see cops that you came up with, or, gung-ho 5 years into it, they're 20, 30 pounds overweight, negative about if it's sunny out, it should be raining, right? Or vice versa.
Right.
And no matter what happens, there's that victim mentality and things that they feel that they can't control. The smallest policy change becomes the biggest deal. So all that negativity could be channeled into something you can control. And that's internal. What am I going to do? What's my plan? Where's my focus?
Well, I think when you say that too, all the things that happen during the job, I know for a lot of folks, and I know myself, it is all that PTSD and stress and trauma. And I know for myself, I'm happy that I recognized it and dealt with it during my career. And I think getting out of it is also taking care of yourself while you're in it, and the wellness factors and the things like that about it, so that it doesn't all hit you when you walk away from it.
Right.
dealing with it and being a little more healthy perspective, and having those crutches to fall on or people to talk to, or recognizing the problems and the health side of it,
Right.
and trying to maintain that stuff and not drinking too much, and
Right.
just making sure the mental health well-being is probably just as important to walking out of it as what you do when you walk out of it, because carrying that baggage.
Right. Over time, that bag gets heavier and heavier. And so you compound that with a career, a negative outlook at that. By the time you retire, you're counting down 2 years in advance to the day. We know so many people like that. They know when they're leaving the job. They don't know what they're doing after the job. And on top of that, you have, the depression, the PTSD, the obesity through the life of law enforcement that's so rampant. And then you hit your retirement date. Now you've lost the things that you didn't realize you relied so much upon. So many people, it's their identity. You're behind the 8 ball on your physical health. Your mental health isn't great. There isn't a plan. So all of a sudden, your whole world's, you've spent 20, 30 years into a career, giving it your everything, sacrificed so much, potentially multiple marriages, and the regret of not seeing your kids grow up. And at the end of it, you're not happy of even doing it. So what do? You get into the bottle. You seclude yourself. And like you said, that downward spiral continues. And if it's not early death from health, suicides, the stuff we don't want to talk about, but we all know. And I think that's why it's important to, early on in your career, not only just chart your path through your career, but also chart your path when you retire. I think it's equally important, if not more important, because those are the years that you get to enjoy life. Hobby, if it's working at Home Depot or Cabela's or something that you just still want to be around people and stay busy, or supplement that income. That's part of it, unfortunately, especially for those of us who have had other marriages or whatever, and but you could still be happy doing that.
Yeah, it's like during the process, you kind of get to acclimate to yourself to outside life. I mean, so much changes. There's been times where the whole world falls apart and everything's on fire. I can deal with that, but then outside of work, trying to make a decision on where I want to go to eat just dumbfounds me.
Absolutely.
And if you don't deal with it now, you don't deal with it when you're in it, you're gonna end up just blind, just walking into a world you don't understand anymore.
Yeah, that's perfect way to put it. It's not the world, It's a foreign land, and you're not typically in a good state. Now there's those worst case scenarios, or you've planned through your career, you're satisfied, you've left on your terms. It's embrace, it's a celebration. But now you're excited and have a purpose outside of it.
Right.
And that's what I think is important for people to focus on is, maybe I didn't get to see my kids all their games, but I have grandkids and I get to be there for that.
Right.
I get that purpose, and refocusing on the positivity as opposed to the negativity. And have a few of those beers. That's okay, right?
Just a few.
You brought up one of kind of having a plan for how important having a plan for after you retire is, and I when I look back and you see those couples that tend to really struggle when they become empty nesters, right? Mm-hmm. Because they didn't necessarily have a plan for what it is that they were going to do when the kids were gone, and now it's just you and your spouse. And I think it's the same concept. We get so busy, we get so wrapped up in our roles,
Right.
either as moms, dads, or role in our job, that we're not really thinking about what we want to do when we stop being the kind of the primary in that role. So, as your kids are growing up, you're mom and dad, and that's an incredibly important role. But what is your role going to be when you're not mom and dad? You'll always be mom and dad, but
Right.
the reliance upon you and the things that your children need you for is gone.
Right.
So what do you do with that? And as you start to boil some of this stuff down, it's really kind of taking a look at those things and planning for that, so that when it gets there, it's not a surprise,
Right.
and you're not wondering, well, what do I do with that now, and how do I process this, and how do I work through that? So
Kind of ongoing too.
Right.
I mean, even during, when you joke around, I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire, is to your wife, what are you doing now for it? Because
Exactly.
I know there's how many times where you get busy and there's weeks at a time you don't see each other or talk much, and even through the last 22 years, it's been, I have to find out who my wife again is, because we haven't talked in 6 months.
Right.
yeah,
And then, you compound that if you don't do it for a whole career,
Right.
what do you do? So
Right.
it's just going to be that ongoing care and wellness, and just taking care of nurturing your wellness, your relationships, your
It's a lifestyle. And
lifestyle.
It's not a lifestyle that needs to end or start when you're close to retirement or changing professions. It's it's that ongoing reflection of what is my purpose, what is my fulfillment, and it's okay to be selfish, to take care of yourself and make yourself happy, because if you're doing that, then you're radiating that happiness, and the people around you are happy. You're not dragging them down. You don't become an anchor pulling them down. You're uplifting. You're positive.
right.
It's a perspective. And if you can switch that a little bit throughout your career, if you're not happy in your position, get some training, switch positions, promote, demote sometimes is an option. It's looked at as it's frowned upon. But it's your career.
Right.
It's your happiness. And I know a few people that have promoted for the career path, not their life path. And that's where things can start degrading and going down a negative path. And that's ups and downs of life. That will always happen. But being able to self-identify, make adjustments, and switch down the path. And just because you have a plan doesn't mean it has to be the plan.
Right.
That plan can change. It can shift. Life happens. Good things happen. Bad things happen that can alter that path. But being able to call an audible, change it up, but doing it as much as you can for yourself and having that sense of control, I think will really benefit the next chapter, whatever that may be.
So if you were to kind of wrap this up, what would the call to action be? What would you encourage the listeners to do? Whether it's just a career change, and I shouldn't say just, because that's a huge decision. Right? Whether it's a career change, whether it's when do I retire, what are some things that you could give them that would help them in ensuring that they're making the right choice?
I think it starts with trusting your heart and following your own joy and happiness. Being okay with the unknown. And we train throughout a law enforcement career of you're never out of the fight. That's the same thing when you're off the job. You're in control of your path. You're not out of the fight. The fight might be different, but at the end of the day, you're not giving up. You take control of your call, which is your life. You can control the scene, you can control your life, and follow your heart. I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, I really appreciate just the time that we were able to spend on this topic, and I think that there's a lot more that we could get into. But I really do believe that this really kind of helps folks elevate their call to service, so that they've got a plan. They know where they're headed. They know what they want to do in the future, and it gives them the best opportunity for success. And this podcast, truly, we are always looking for those things that's going to help that law enforcement officer, not just success on the job, but success in life. To make sure that they get to fulfill everything that they want to fulfill in their role, both on the job and off the job. So I appreciate the conversation that we were able to have around this this afternoon, and just the time that we were able to spend, and just encourage everybody to never stop leading. That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion.